What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future.
Robcore. Let me tell you something, Robcore, man. Let me tell you something now. Captain Carrot. Captain Carrot, he's a super bunny. I love Captain Carrot. Captain Carrot is one of my favorite characters ever in just the history of comic books because he's just fun. Like, he's a fun, goofy character. Like, that's really all he is. He's just a fun, silly character. Of course, this comes out of 1980s comic books. And anybody who knows anything about the history of comic books will tell you everybody in the 1980s was crazy. And Captain Carrot was no different. So here's the deal. So this is the origin story of Captain Carrot. But the difference with this is that this was actually like a preview. But this is as close as we get to the origin. This is a preview for Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew. And that's usually what comic books did back in, really back in that time period. Even now they do it to a degree, but not so much. They just kind of give you solicitations at the end of comic books and just say, hey, this is going to be continued on in such and such and such and such and such and such, or hey, be sure to check out this, this, and this. The only real exception to that you find is Valiant Comics. And Valiant Comics will still do previews for upcoming stories, especially when you went through like the early Valiant Comics with like, the relaunch and around 2012. When you read like Exo-Man Award, they were doing previews for upcoming characters, and it was a really good way to kind of reel people in, to grab them in. They were 4 pages or something like that. They weren't super lengthy, but it was still pretty cool to see. So it's good to see that kind of thing is still a part of the comic book community. But with regards to this basically is just a preview to give us the origin. And what it does is it picks up with Clark Kent, right? And the only thing that we get here really just kind of picks up in the middle of everything. What we're basically told is that, Clark Kent, of course, being a news anchor at this point in time and the publication of DC Comics, is basically dealing or is reporting on the idea that people are losing their minds, that people are just kind of devolving down into their most base form. And that's the common theme here, is that for some reason or another, people are de-evolving. That initially it takes on the form of their actions, but then like their very nuances, their own personal, concepts begin to follow suit, in the sense you have people hanging from trees, eating bananas, so on and so forth. And while not everybody's been affected by it, it does raise concern. Now, of course, because of the fact this is being viewed as like a pandemic of sorts, going around the city of Metropolis, once Clark Kent's able to get away from being on the news, he of course transforms into Superman, and the question is, how do we deal with this? Well, in the middle of him kind of investigating what it is that's going on, another guy is suddenly hit by this ray of light that de-evolves him back into acting like an ape. Now again, that's kind of the interesting thing about Superman, is because back during this time in the 1980s, DC was writing anything they could to get people to read Superman. Because you got to remember, going from, for decades and decades, Superman was like the front face of DC, and even now he is. I mean, Superman is the face of DC Comics. He's a character they guard jealously. I mean, the Superman symbol is more recognizable than the Christian cross. But in terms of readers and in terms of overall popularity among comic book fans, I would say Batman is probably more popular now. We know that because Batman's comics outsell Superman's comics, so the proof is in the pudding. But with regards to his character as he was being written here, this was around the time where Superman was basically having his powers reduced. That was a Julius Schwartz idea. He wanted to drop off Superman's powers, make him more relatable, nullify the weakness of kryptonite, and fans hated it. They wanted to see spacefaring adventures. And so because of this, fans started turning to other publications in DC, and the numbers of Batman began to bolster. They began to grow, expanded on by the idea of the post-crisis landscape and the idea of Batman becoming darker. Now, that hadn't happened at this point. This story was written in 1982. This is Teen Titans number 16. But this was where Superman was on his way out. This is where Superman was on his way to losing popularity and being replaced by Batman as comic book fans' favorite DC hero. Now, having said that, of course, with Superman going through and investigating, he traces the source of this origin, or the source of this beam, coming from Pluto as best as he can tell. Now, of course, this is where we kind of start to get into this weird situation of Superman having powers of convenience, in the sense that one of the things that he says is, when he changed into his Clark Kent outfit, he had a special pocket in his Superman suit where he stores his Clark Kent uniform. So this is one of the weird little nuances that we get here and there. But the problem is, once he tries to basically leave the planet Earth, there's an invisible barrier that keeps him there. But he ends up realizing there's a meteor that actually crashes through the barrier. And so Superman kind of realizes, well, if the meteor can come through the barrier from the other side, then I can use the meteor to go through the barrier from this side. Now, of course, that makes no sense. It's basically creating a corollary where none exists. It's like saying, well, because it's 12 o'clock now, that means it's lunchtime. Well, it's like saying, well, because it's 12 a.m., that means it's lunchtime. 12 p.m., 12 a.m. are not the same thing. And it creates kind of a funny scenario here. But again, it's just kind of weird, in terms of how this unfolds. But once he breaks through this weird dimensional barrier, he suddenly ends up finding himself in basically basically another universe, you know, another Earth. Now the funny thing about this is initially right off the bat, he doesn't pick up on what's going on. Instead, he's just kind of like, oh, hey, there's a Daily Planet. I'll just go there and I'll change back into Clark Kent and I'll try to see if I can figure out what's going on. He goes to his desk and he sits down on the lap of a guy by the name of Roger Rabbit. Now, to be honest with you guys, as far as I'm aware, Roger Rabbit is a Disney property. And so I'm not really sure how we reconcile these two things of DC using the name of Roger Rabbit and Disney owning it. I'm not 100% sure about that. But with regards to Superman transcending the barrier, showing up in this cartoon world, this was just written for the sake of convenience. And that's how a lot of comic books were done back then. I mean, in this day and age, things are done for the sake of convenience to a degree, but people are also a little wiser now that they've kind of picked up on what comic books traditionally used to do. And so if suddenly somebody just appeared somewhere and there was no explanation for how they got there, in comic books, fans would be like, what's going on here? Like, we need some kind of explanation here. Like, we need some kind of answer. That's usually kind of left to continuity sticklers, but in this day and age, they don't really do that much anymore. Instead, it takes like 15 story arcs to get to that point. You know, for example, the death of Charles Xavier in Marvel Comics during Avengers versus X-Men, that wasn't something that just suddenly happened. It wasn't like Cyclops suddenly became a bad guy. Cyclops becoming a villain has its roots all the way back in Deadly Genesis after the House of M. So it was a 10-year long running event leading up to the point where Cyclops became a bad guy. It was a gradual change in his character over the years. But again, that's just kind of what they do now in the modern days, as opposed to just back then where things were done quick, fast, and in a hurry. And there's something to be said about doing comic books in this fashion. But the fact remains here that, of course, you know, with Clark Kent sitting down on the lap of Roger Rabbit and Roger Rabbit freaking out, he's just like, what in the hell is going on? Like, it's a talking rabbit. And that's what I love so much about this, is because, like, look, Superman, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, man, but like, you can fly because the yellow sun allows you to fly. Is it really that hard to believe in such a thing as like a talking rabbit? Not only that, Roger Rabbit is basically this Earth's allegory of Clark Kent, in the sense that he is an artist. He's not really a press guy. He's not a newspaper guy. But Roger Rabbit also created a superhero called Super Squirrel, which is the animal version of Superman. And that's what this planet is. This planet, or I guess this universe, is one where instead of humans being sentient, it's animals who are sentient. You know, rabbits and ducks and mooses and so on and so forth. You know, they're all just kind of these sentient things. Of course, with Superman kind of asking what in the world's going on, Roger Rabbit being as curious about Superman as Superman is about him, their conversation is pretty civil here. And that's one of the other things that kind of touches home to as grounded as you can get with a guy that is from an, is an alien that can fly kind of situation. But of course, Roger Rabbit's kind of talking to him, grabs a carrot, eats on the carrot a little bit, so on and so forth. You know, and he kind of talks about how, he has a costume that he wore to a Halloween party, to dress up as a superhero, that kind of thing. But what ends up taking place here is one of the beings on this animal world is hit by the same being that hit Superman's Earth. And those individuals begin to devolve. Instead of it, turning into like an ape or something like that, it's this sentient dog devolving down into its baseline sentient form, a dog as we would recognize it. And so, of course, Superman x-rays the pot that has these carrots, knocks the carrot out of Roger's hands, only for Roger to begin kind of absorbing this energy and turning into like a superpowered being. Now, of course, in his anger, he punches Superman, but he doesn't realize how strong he is until he, knocks him through a wall. And that's when we basically get Captain Carrot. That's when he basically dons this little cosplay outfit, this costume that he made for himself, calling himself a superhero. And he and Superman basically team up to face off against these guys, against whatever this force is. Now, in terms of what this force is basically send all these animals into their base states, that send the people on Earth into their base states. That carries on into Captain Carrot and his amazing zoo crew storyline. We don't really find out exactly what all had happened, at least not in this particular story. Instead, it just kind of, it's a way for DC to basically kind of engineer the two of them meeting one another and then set Captain Carrot off on his own story. But again, Captain Carrot and his amazing zoo crew, that's been a story that I've actually not been able to get my hands on. Otherwise, we would have just done that. But yeah, it's impossible to get a hold of as far as I'm aware. But this is the origin story of Captain Carrot. Captain Carrot, the Super Bunny. I love Captain Carrot. I love Captain Carrot's character. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys really want to see it, I'll try to get my hands on Captain Carrot and his amazing zoo crew, but no promises. I mean, it's super difficult to get a hold of. So if you guys are interested in that, leave a comment down below, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
Mm.